When my neighbor and her best friend knocked on my door one quiet evening, I thought it was just small talk. But then Elena smiled, Marissa laughed, and they said, "We're bored at 45, but you look like fun." I didn't know it then, but that night would change the way I looked at love, at age, and at myself forever. I wasn't expecting anyone that evening. My apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge and the low glow of a lamp in the corner. I'd settled into what I thought would be an uneventful night. Maybe some leftover pizza, a movie, and bed before midnight. But then came a knock. Firm, deliberate. Not the kind of knock you mistake for someone passing by. When I opened the door, I froze. Standing there was Elena, my neighbor across the hall. I'd seen her plenty of times in the elevator. Graceful, confident, always dressed with an understated elegance that made her look like she carried her own weather with her. Tonight, though, she was different. She wore a simple sundress, soft fabric that caught the hallway light, and her smile. It was equal parts polite and mischievous. Beside her was another woman I hadn't met yet. She had a quick, playful energy about her, eyes that seemed to catch everything in the room at once. Later, I'd learned her name was Marissa, Elena's oldest friend, visiting from out of town. Where Elena's presence was calm and steady, Marissa's was bright, like someone who made the air a little lighter just by laughing. Before I could say anything, Marissa tilted her head, her bracelets jingling softly as she leaned against the doorframe. "We're bored at 45, she said with a grin that dared me to laugh. "But you," her eyes skimmed me over, playful but not unkind. "You look like fun." For a second, I wasn't sure if they were serious or teasing. I caught Elena's expression, not quite laughing, not quite embarrassed, but as though she wanted to see what I'd do with the moment. I wasn't used to being on the receiving end of such direct attention, especially from women who carried themselves with the kind of confidence time only gives you. My throat went a little dry, but I managed to smile. That's not usually what my neighbors say when they knock on my door. Elena laughed softly, a sound warm and low. She exchanged a glance with Marissa that felt like an inside joke, then looked back at me. We were having some wine, talking about old times, and then we thought, why not? There was something about the way she said, "why not?" Not careless, but curious, like she was opening a door to see if I'd step through it. The hallway light glowed behind them, catching the curve of Elena's shoulder, the shimmer of Marissa's bracelets. I realized I was holding the door a little too tightly, caught between uncertainty and intrigue. My instincts told me this was unusual, maybe even complicated, but another part of me, the part that noticed how alive their eyes looked, couldn't help but be pulled in. I stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Well, come on then. Let's see if I can live up to the reputation you've just given me." And just like that, the night shifted. They didn't hesitate. The moment I stepped aside, Elena and Marissa slipped past me into my apartment, filling the small space with their presence. I don't think I'd realized how quiet my evenings usually were until the two of them entered. The faint perfume of jasmine trailing from Elena, the sharper citrusy note from Marissa, the sound of their low laughter overlapping. My apartment wasn't much, a mismatched couch, a little bookshelf I'd been meaning to organize, and a coffee table with a couple of abandoned mugs. I suddenly saw it through their eyes and felt that nervous flutter in my stomach, as though I needed to impress them. But Elena only glanced around with a gentle smile, and Marissa gave a playful nod. "Cozy," Marissa said, flopping onto the couch without ceremony, her bracelets clinking as she got comfortable. "Better than the sterile kitchen table we've been staring at all evening." Elena settled more gracefully, smoothing her dress beneath her as she sat. She didn't take up much space, but somehow her presence filled the room. "Can I get you something?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but aware of how my voice betrayed a slight edge of nerves. "Coffee," Elena said with quiet decisiveness. "If you don't mind." "Coffee sounds perfect," Marissa chimed in, leaning back, her legs crossed, her gaze following me as I walked toward the kitchen corner. As the kettle warmed, I listened to their laughter flow behind me, like the hum of a conversation I wasn't part of yet, but wanted to be. When I returned with 3 steaming mugs, Marissa took hers with both hands, blowing across the surface before sipping dramatically. Elena accepted hers with a soft, "Thank you," her fingertips brushing against mine, warm, steady, sending a small jolt through me that I tried not to show. The conversation began light. They asked me what I did for work, where I was from, the kind of small talk neighbors usually make but hadn't gotten around to before. But as the minutes passed and the coffee cups lowered, something shifted. Elena's voice softened. We were talking earlier about how quickly time moves once you hit a certain age. How suddenly 45 doesn't feel so different from 35, and yet everything has changed. She gave a small, almost apologetic laugh. It makes you think about what you've done and what you've missed. Marissa leaned forward, her bracelets catching the light. What she means is, we don't want to waste time being bored anymore. We want to feel alive. She grinned, but her eyes carried something more vulnerable than her tone. I found myself listening closer, not just to their words, but to the unspoken weight behind them. I admitted that 20-something, I still felt lost, like everyone else had a map, and I was still wandering. Elena's eyes found mine over the rim of her mug. Steady, thoughtful. You don't have to have it figured out yet, she said. You've got time. More than you realize. Marissa laughed softly, nudging my shoulder with hers. Listen to her. She's the wise one. And in that moment, sitting on my small couch with two women who carried decades of stories in their eyes, I felt something I hadn't expected, a pull toward their honesty. A curiosity not just about their laughter, but about the quiet things they chose to share with me that night. The coffee had cooled, forgotten on the table, but none of us seemed eager to move. The room carried that low, humming energy that comes when conversation has shifted past small talk into something more layered. Marissa, ever the brighter flame of the two, perched sideways on the couch so that her shoulder was almost pressed against mine. She'd laugh at something I said, then lean in and nudge me lightly, the touch playful but sparking more awareness in me than it should have. The jingling of her bracelets punctuated her movements, and I found myself noticing every detail. The warm citrus note of her perfume, the way her smile lingered a second longer when our eyes met. Elena, in contrast, sat quietly on my other side, not withdrawn, just present in a different way. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, her attention fixed on whoever was speaking. When she glanced at me, her gaze lingered, calm, steady, almost assessing. She didn't need to nudge or joke. Her presence was felt in subtler ways. At one point, Elena reached for her mug, her arm brushing mine as she did. The touch was light, accidental maybe, but it lingered just long enough that my pulse quickened. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she let her hand rest on her cup, close enough that the warmth of her skin seemed to radiate into me. I shifted slightly, caught between the urge to move closer and the fear of reading too much into it. Marissa noticed, or maybe she'd been waiting for it all along. She smirked, eyes darting from me to Elena and back again. Careful, she teased. We might end up liking you more than we planned. I laughed, trying to keep it light, but inside I felt the edges of something sharper, more complicated. They were older, yes, and carried themselves with a confidence I hadn't earned yet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the teasing, there was something real building in the spaces between us. In the way Elena's eyes softened when she looked at me, in the way Marissa's laughter carried that faint thread of loneliness underneath. I found myself wondering, was I just an amusing distraction to them, or had I somehow stumbled into something neither of us expected? The room seemed smaller than before. Every shift of movement mattered. Elena tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers grazing her cheek. Marissa stretching her arm behind me along the couch, her hand resting casually but close enough that I felt the ghost of her touch against my back. I tried to focus on their words, but my thoughts tangled with sensation. The closeness, the warmth, the steady rhythm of Elena's breathing beside me, the sparkle of Marissa's laughter. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing bold had happened yet, but it was enough to feel the air between us tighten, charged with the possibility that this night was about more than just coffee and conversation. The night stretched on, unhurried. The clock on the wall ticked, but I barely noticed it anymore. The coffee mugs were empty now, abandoned on the table, and the three of us had slipped into the kind of conversation that doesn't happen often, the kind you can't plan, only fall into. Elena was the first to steer us there. She leaned back against the couch cushions, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes distant, as if she were seeing something beyond the walls of my apartment. "It's strange," she said softly, "how you can look back and realize entire years went by while you were just keeping busy." Marissa nodded, her tone more blunt. "You raise kids, build a career, or chase after someone who doesn't deserve you, and then one day you wake up and wonder where all the time went." She glanced at me, her expression lightened by a half-smile. "Don't let that happen to you. You got a head start." I swallowed, unsure how to respond at first. Their words carried a weight, like a glimpse into the future I hadn't lived yet. I've been so focused on trying to figure myself out, what career I wanted, what kind of man I wanted to be, that I hadn't thought about the danger of drifting through years without noticing. "I feel like I'm already behind," I admitted, surprising even myself. My voice was low, almost uncertain. "Most of my friends seem to know what they're doing. I'm used vandering, goose." There was a silence then, but not the uncomfortable kind. Elena's gaze found mine, steady and warm. "You're not behind," she said. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Trust me, if I could go back, I'd tell my younger self not to rush so much." Her words landed deeper than I expected. I found myself watching her, the quiet confidence in her voice, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes, the way she carried a kind of grace that came not from youth, but from everything she'd lived through. Marissa broke the heaviness with a laugh, though it didn't feel forced. "Elena always was the wise one," she said, nudging her friend playfully. "Me, I just want to enjoy myself before I'm too old to climb a flight of stairs without huffing." We laughed together, and the sound eased the weight in the room. But even in the laughter, there was something tender, a quiet acknowledgement of vulnerability, of truths they hadn't shared with many people. The light from the lamp cast soft shadows across their faces. Elena's eyes seemed darker in the glow, her expression thoughtful. Marissa leaned back, stretching out, her arm brushing lightly against mine in a way that didn't feel accidental. I realized then that this wasn't just idle company. They hadn't knocked on my door because they were bored, not really. They'd come looking for connection, for something genuine. And I felt the stir of something within me, too. Curiosity, yes, but also an unfamiliar warmth, as if I'd been invited into a chapter of their lives they didn't show to just anyone. The night had slipped into that hushed hour where the world outside seems to fall asleep. My apartment was dim now, lit only by the single lamp in the corner. Its glow painted everything in soft gold, blurring edges, making the room feel smaller, closer. None of us spoke much anymore. Words had given way to pauses, to the language of glances and quiet gestures. Elena sat just a little nearer than before. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a shift in posture, the subtle slide of her knee until it brushed against mine. But when she didn't move away, when her warmth stayed pressed there against me, I knew it wasn't chance. She kept her eyes lowered, tracing the rim of her mug with her fingertip, but every so often she looked up, and in those seconds something silent passed between us. On my other side, Marissa leaned back against the couch, her arms stretched casually along the backrest. Her hand hovered near my shoulder, not touching, but close enough that I could sense it. After a moment, she let her head rest against me with a dramatic sigh. "You really do make us feel young again," she said lightly, though her voice carried more sincerity than the words suggested. Her hair brushed against my shoulder, soft against the fabric of my shirt. I froze for a moment, torn between stillness and the urge to lean into it. My heartbeat felt louder than the quiet room allowed. Elena looked over then, her eyes flicking to where Marissa rested against me. There was no jealousy in her gaze, no sharpness, only something steady, almost tender. She gave me the faintest smile, small and private, as though she was saying, "It's all right. Let it be what it is." The air had changed. It wasn't playful anymore, not exactly. It wasn't heavy either. It was charged, fragile, yet alive, as if the whole room was holding its breath. I became aware of every small detail, The faint hum of the fridge, the soft brush of Marissa's hair against my arm, the steady rhythm of Elena's breathing beside me. I didn't move, afraid that any sudden shift might break whatever fragile thread connected us. Instead, I let myself sit there, caught between the two of them, Marissa's easy warmth against my shoulder, Elena's quiet presence grounding me, her knees still touching mine. In that stillness, I felt it, the unspoken desire, the closeness that went deeper than laughter or casual company. Nothing dramatic happened. No bold gestures, no rushed words. Just three people, sitting close, realizing they had crossed into something new without meaning to. I thought of how the night had started, with a knock, a joke, and a playful invitation. Now, hours later, it had become something else entirely. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of things we weren't yet ready to say, but all of us could feel. And somehow, that was enough. The silence lingered, not awkward, but fragile, like the stillness after a piece of music ends, when no one wants to be the first to move. I could feel both of them close, Marissa's head still resting against my shoulder, Elena's knee pressed lightly against mine. My chest tightened with the weight of unspoken things. I knew I had to say something. If I stayed quiet, the moment might pass, slip back into something safer. But my heart didn't want safe anymore. I need to be honest with you, I began, my voice low. Both women looked at me, Marissa tilting her head, playful curiosity in her eyes, and Elena, steady as always, waiting. When you first knocked on my door, I thought maybe this was just a joke, that you wanted to pass some time, have a laugh at my expense. Marissa chuckled softly, not offended. We could be a little forward, I know. I shook my head. No, it's not that. It's just, I don't see you as two women who are bored, looking for distraction. I see you as people I respect, people I'm drawn to. The words came slower now, heavier, and I don't want to pretend that's not true. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then Elena's expression softened, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She reached across the space between us and laid her hand gently over mine on the couch. Her skin was warm, her touch calm but deliberate, fingers slipping between mine with quiet certainty. The contact sent a rush through me, not just excitement, but relief, as though I'd been holding something in and she'd just given me permission to release it. Marissa lifted her head from my shoulder then, not pulling away, but watching us with a look I couldn't quite read. Then, with a grin that softened into something tender, she reached forward too, placing her hand lightly over both of ours. Her bracelets shifted with a soft jingle, her palm pressing gently on top. The three of us sat like that for a long breath, a small circle of warmth. Not a game, not a passing moment, but something real. You're a sweet one, Marissa said, her voice lower now, stripped of its usual teasing edge. I like that about you. Elena gave my hand a gentle squeeze. So do I. I looked at them both, my heart hammering, but what I felt wasn't fear anymore. It was something steadier, as though I'd chosen, and they had chosen too. We didn't need big declarations or dramatic gestures. The way our hands rested together on that old couch was enough to say what words couldn't. The weight I'd been carrying, doubts about the age gap, about what this meant, didn't vanish completely, but it shifted, because in that moment, it didn't feel like I was too young or they were too old. It just felt like connection, plain and true. And for the first time all night, I let myself believe this wasn't just chance. It was the start of something neither of us had expected, but all of us wanted. Eventually, the quiet gave way to reality. The clock's steady ticking reminded us that the night couldn't last forever, no matter how much I wanted it to. Elena shifted slightly, glancing toward the window where the city lights glowed faintly through the curtains. It's late, she said softly, though her tone didn't carry urgency. It was more like an acknowledgement that the spell of the evening had to break. Marissa sighed, leaning back against the couch before stretching her arms overhead. She's right. If we stay much longer, you'll get sick of us. Her smile was playful, but her eyes told a different story, a reluctance to let the moment end. I stood as they did, not wanting to rush them to the door. My apartment felt different now, as though their laughter and presence had left a mark on the walls, making the space feel warmer than it had just hours earlier. At the door, Elena paused. She looked at me in that steady way she always seemed to, her eyes calm, but with a depth that made it hard to look away. Then, without asking, she leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. It wasn't hurried or casual. Her lips lingered just long enough that I felt the warmth of her breath against my skin, the faint trace of her perfume wrapping around me. When she drew back, her hand brushed lightly against my arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, "for the coffee and for listening." Before I could respond, Marissa stepped in with her own brand of affection. She slipped her arms around my waist in a hug that was both playful and tender. Her cheek rested briefly against my chest, and I felt the steady rhythm of her breath. "Don't get too used to us not coming around," she murmured, her tone somewhere between teasing and promise. I laughed softly, though my chest tightened with something more than humor. "I don't think I could, even if I tried." They both smiled then, exchanging a glance that seemed to say more than words. And just like that, they stepped into the hallway, their voices blending as they spoke to one another, their footsteps soft against the carpet. I watched until they disappeared into the glow of the elevator. When the door closed, I leaned back against it, my pulse still unsteady. The apartment was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It carried their warmth, their laughter, the memory of Elena's hand in mine, Marissa's head against my shoulder. I moved to the balcony, drawn by the faint glow across the courtyard. Sure enough, Elena's window was lit, a square of warm light in the night. I stood there for a while, the cool air brushing against my skin, smiling quietly to myself. What had begun as a playful knock, a teasing line about being bored at 45, had become something else entirely. Not just fun, not just distraction, but connection, unexpected, complicated, and very, very real. And for the first time in a long while, I felt certain that this was only the beginning.